Okay, so the Rambam has set out these different groups and what they believe. That some people believe um, in. Well, he talked about not serving God for reward. In the chapter before that, he talked about these different groups. Um, that. People think about reward in different ways, the Messianic era, the resurrection of the dead. People think about it in very physical ways. When it came to the resurrection of the dead, he said, some people think the third class of opinion is the sought good will consist in the resurrection of the dead, that it will be physical. This implies one will live after death and be in the family, eat and drink. He says this is the third group. He doesn't agree with this. The punishment will be the one will not come back again. These thinkers also point to proofs for the remarks of sages. Now, so this is one of the groups that he thinks is false. The fourth class is, thinks that you get things in this world. The fifth, and then he says, basically all of these are wrong. He says you need to serve God for not for reward. Our sages, however, knew this is difficult and that not everyone could attain it. Right, the significance matters now clear. It is evident that what we have stated is truly the aim of the Torah. At the basis of the principle set down with sage, no one can be blind. But therefore, in order the masses might be settled in their beliefs, sages permitted them to perform meritorious actions with the hope of reward, and to avoid doing evil out of punishment, right? The idea is that Chazal told people, there is reward and punishment. And the Rambam does believe there's reward and punishment, but some people believe it in a physical way, in different ways, because the point is to get them to do the Torah. And he says, so we must now come to the point where it's necessary for you to know people are divided into three groups about the statements of the sages. The first, right? So what? And have to ask ourselves, right? He just was talking about reward and punishment, and how people have these sort of physical images of it, and that's all wrong, and that the sages gave them that just to engage them like children. And he says there are three groups of people. Because the Rambam has to deal with these different statements of Chazal, right? Some of them, are not all consistent about reward and punishment, or the Messianic era, the world to come, the Garden of Eden. There's all kinds of statements. So he says people are divided into three groups when it comes to statements of the rabbis, right? One group takes their words literally. This is due to their ignorance about science and their distance from knowledge. They think that all these remarks that the sages make are, are literal, and that's of course wrong. This class suffers from poverty of intellect. Their folly deserves our pity. In their own minds, they're honoring the sages. In reality, they're degrading them. They rob our religion of its beauty. In other words, the things in the Talmud and other things cannot be taken literally. It's not how they're meant. The second group is also numerous. They read or hear the words of the sages and accept them in their literal significations, thinking the sages meant nothing but what the literal interpretation indicates. But instead of just, accepting them, they just use that to make sport of the words of the sages from time to time. Right? So he says that's even worse. In other words, taking the words of the sages literally, that shouldn't be taken literally, is problematic, he says. So some people do that, and they just do it because they're ignorant, and that's problematic. Some people do it because they just want to make fun of Chazal. That's even worse. Third group of thinkers is so few in number, one would not even call it a class. It's just like a single object. There are those who recognize the greatness and intellectual brilliance of the sages, found overall collection of number of statements, where each word indicates very true matter. Although the number of these discourses is small and scattered about in different portions of their writings, they nevertheless indicate the perfection of the authors. They know the sages would not talk absurdities, and they are convinced beyond a doubt that the words have a revealed and a hidden meaning. Everything they spoke of matters. Everything that they spoke of matters impossible. These discourses are in the form of riddles and parables. In other words, whenever you find something absurd in the Talmud, in the Midrash, wherever it is, that means it's actually a metaphor for something, and its meaning is being hidden. Those who study philology know that a riddle is a mode of speech whose true meaning is hidden and not apparent. As in the verse, let me tell you a riddle. The words of the sages consist entirely in elevated matters of the highest import. However, they're expressed in the form of riddles and parables. So that's interesting, right? He says, just from reading the words of Chazal, you can't take the words of Chazal literally. If you take them literally, okay, so you might, think that reward is always physical or something, but you can't do that. If reader, you belong to the tone of the first names classes, they're not paying attention to any of my remarks on the subject because not a word of it will suit you. He says, if you're from one of the stupider groups, don't even read my book here because you're just gonna be confused. You'll dislike it. For how can the light food of little weight suit a person accustomed for taking a bad food? Will just injure him. If, however, you're one of those who consist of third class, when you come across any of the sages' remarks, which reason rejects, you pause and reflect on it and recognize it's a riddle and an allegory. You spend the night wrapped up in thought, dwelling in anxious reflection over its interpretation. You will analyze this discourse of mine and it will profit you, God willing. In other words, these are the people that he thinks know what they're talking about. Is that if something seems absurd, it's a metaphor. So, again, we want to keep in mind what's his opinion on the resurrection of the dead, and is he sort of hiding something about it that he's not revealing? I will now begin the subject I originally intended. Know that just as a blind man can have no form, right? This is going to be about reward and punishment. Just as a blind man cannot know anything about color, a deaf person's sound, or a eunuch the desire to feel sexual intercourse, so too the body cannot comprehend the pleasures of the soul. Even as fish do not know the element of fire because they are in water, so are the delights of the world of the spirit unknown to the world of the flesh. We have no pleasure in any way except what is physical and what the senses can comprehend, eating and drinking, and sexual intercourse. Whatever is outside of these is non-existent to us. We do not discern it, neither can we grasp it. This truly must necessarily be the case, for we live in a material world. And the only pleasure we can comprehend must be material. But the joys of the spirit are everlasting and uninterrupted. And there is no resemblance in any possible way between the spiritual and bodily enjoyments. In other words, he's saying, right, if you say that you know what the world after is and what that kind of reward is, you can't conceive of it at all, he says, because we only know physicality and physical pleasure. And he's obviously saying that the reward is not physical, it's spiritual. It is, and it doesn't sound crazy to us, but there clearly was a big argument about this. It is incorrect according to that. By the way, I think I showed you this, that there's this movie that just came out by these two rabbis, and it's called Gehenna, which means hell, the movie. And it's all physical, it's all about physical pain. And it's totally against the Rambam, even though these are, I think they're Spartan who made it. It is incorrect according to the Torah scholars and the divine philosophers to assert that the angels, the stars, and the spheres enjoy no delights. Right? So there are these spiritual beings, the angels, and according to the Rambam and the way that they saw science back then, the stars and the spheres, those are spiritual, and they do have delight, whatever that means. They have exceedingly great delight in their comprehension of the Creator. For them, this is an everlasting felicity which never stops. What is the true joy, right, of the spirit? That is comprehension of the Creator. That's very important to know. I think there's an Islamic belief like this also, right? Because people ask all the time, what happens after death? And the answer, according to the Rambam, is our bodies, we don't have our bodies anymore after death. We only have our souls. And the soul delights in things spiritual. And that is the comprehension of the Creator. And it will be likewise for us too, when after death, the worthy among us will reach that exalted stage. They will experience no physical pleasures, neither will they have any desire for them, nor any more than a king of sovereign power will wish to vest himself in the material realm. If such is our state in this material world, how much more? Oh, he says that many will suffer Many people similarly shun the greatest of all physical delights out of the fear that it will bring them shame and reproach of others, because they seek a good reputation. If such is our state in this material world, how much more would be the case in the spiritual world, the world to come, where our souls will attain a knowledge of the Creator like the higher bodies, or even more. By higher bodies means the spheres and the stars. This pleasure cannot be divided into parts. Now, as he's saying, don't disparage this pleasure. This pleasure is actually much greater. By there, and he quotes the Gemara: in the world to come, there'll be no eating and drinking, no washing, no anointing, no marital relations, only the righteous sitting, crowns on their head, delighting in the splendor of the Shekhinah. He says, so what does it mean, crowns on their head? That's a metaphor. It's the preservation of the soul with its intellectual attainment. For the Rambam, intellectual and spiritual are very close. Namely, the creator and the merger of the two into one. And this has been described by philosophers. And so the benefit and final goal in reaching this exalted company and attaining this lofty level, continuation of the soul, as we have stated, is endless, like the continuation of the creator, who is the cause of its continuation in that it comprehends him. For the Rambam, you get the world to come by learning how to comprehend God. It is explained in elementary philosophy. This is the great bliss with which no bliss is comparable, to which no pleasure can be likened. For how can the enduring and infinite be likened to something which has cessation and an end? Okay, so he says the reward for mitzvot, the reward for Torah, is in the next world. It's after one dies. But it's spiritual. It's not physical. All those who devote themselves to bodily pleasures, rejecting truth and choosing falsehood, are cut off from that state of things and remain as detached matter. So this is what karet is. In this connection, the prophet said, no eye has seen besides you, indicating the world to come cannot be comprehended by physical senses. Sages, in interpreting this phrase, comment of all prophets prophesied only about, this is interesting, all prophets prophesied only about the days of Messiah. The world to come, no eye has seen it save God alone. Now, we have no idea what reward is in the next world. We know it's spiritual, not physical. There will be a point at which he'll say, because the body degrades. And again, remember, the Rambam believes in reward and punishment. There's no question about that. The Rambam clearly believes in the reward, in the spiritual reward of the soul in the next world after one dies. The Rambam clearly believes in a messianic era. The big question is going to be, does the Rambam believe in the physical resurrection of the dead at the time of the Messiah? Now, he's going to talk about the resurrection of the dead, but we'll have to look deeply into his words. Just give you a sense of this chapter. He says, in terms of reward and punishment that is alluded to in the Torah, they're all physical things. And that's there to facilitate our service of God. If you give it full reflection, you'll find it to be equivalent to be told, if you carry out some of these laws with love and diligence, I'll help you to do all of them. And then he talks about the Garden of Eden, Gehinnom, hell, the resurrection of the dead. We'll have to look closely at that. The days of the Messiah. And he's going to sort of tease all of these apart, and we'll want to get a sense of what does he believe about each, and especially the physical resurrection of the dead. Okay, all right, we'll do that next week.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.